1954, this ruling paved the way for integration and inspired educational changes for students with disabilities. In 1972, it laid the foundations for the rights to an education for all children with disabilities and established a standard that each child must be offered an individualized education. In 1973, it guaranteed and protected students with disabilities from discrimination. In 1975, it ensured that students with disabilities were provided a free, appropriate public education and that it is tailored to the individual needs, and provides children with disabilities the same opportunity for special education as typical students. In 1990, it prohibited discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. In 2001, it supported that setting high standards and establishing measurable goals can improve individuals' outcomes in education. States were required to develop assessments based on skills and assesses all students to receive federal school funding. In 2004, it revised to align with the requirements of No Child Left Behind, and the reauthorization included requirements of highly qualified teachers, establishment of goals for students with disabilities, and assessments for levels of these students. In 2012, it was initiated by the New York State Office of the State Comptroller, headed by Thomas P. DiNapoli. Over the last decade, this office has found a pattern of mismanagement, waste, and fraud by private special education providers. In 2014, audits cumulatively identified almost $42 million in disallowances. These findings provided evidence of financial waste and abuse, which threatens the health and well-being of children whose education and care are being compromised. In December 2016, the Early Intervention Program must conform to federal regulations issued by the U.S. Department of Education and recent amendments of public health law to ensure that early intervention services are delivered consistent with federal statutes and regulations.
Now that you understand the timeline of the special education history, we will demonstrate the events of the 2014 special education fraud through a mock trial with testimonies from practicing special education providers in New York State. We received various email responses from these providers with their own opinions and personal experiences regarding this topic.
In the occupational therapy justice system, fraud-based offenses are considered especially heinous. In New York State, the dedicated auditors who investigate these vicious felonies are members of an elite squad called the Special Education Providers. These are their stories.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Calling the case of the people of the state of New York versus the Special Education Providers. In 2012, a special education audit was initiated and the effort found numerous cases of waste, abuse, and criminal conduct. The audit findings found nearly $42 million in questionable or fraudulent expenses. We call upon multiple witnesses who have personal experiences with the special education fraud. I call up Jennifer Howell, occupational therapist at Olean General Hospital. Please begin your testimony.
My response here is purely my personal recollection. I don't have any evidence or research to support it. I believe the changes in reimbursement rates and practice policies resulted at the state level due to findings of inefficiency. This was by some bigger providers who were benefiting from the old structure, rather than working in the best interest of the children and families they served. I fully support increasing accountability and efficiency with state monies. However, the results have been a loss of early intervention services and providers, specifically in rural areas where bigger agency practices do not exist. I live in a rural part of the state where we are experiencing a significant shortage of providers, and children are going without service. The situation is further exacerbated by decreased reimbursement, increased complexity of billing, documenting, and regulations, causing many and even most independent providers in my region to leave early intervention practice.
I call up Ellen Rousman, physical therapist at Tender Age Physical Therapy. Please begin your testimony.
I cannot address specifically what happened in 2014. I'm personally a physical therapist. My agency provides occupational therapy services as well. Stricter rules and regulations have been imposed, which has made it very difficult to continue to operate as an agency. From my own point of view, documentation is taking longer, my pay is less, and it takes longer to receive payment. In general, the end result is that there are fewer therapists providing early intervention services. Early intervention and preschool children are often being put on waiting lists and not receiving the services that they need.
I call up Cheon Park, pre-K special education contractor and bilingual SEIT and preschool, accused of corrupting the New York State special education financial system. Please begin your testimony.
I'm truly sorry for my conduct, and I sincerely apologize to the court and the government for my misconduct. I did not provide services to children who needed it and falsely billed for them. I used the money intended for children with special needs for my own personal use to pay for a new Mercedes, an employee to clean my house, and tutoring services for my children. I knew that what I was doing was wrong.
We found the defendant guilty of corruption in New York State's special education financing system. Mr. Park, you are found guilty of a federal crime and will be sentenced to 63 months in prison and payment of $2.1 million in restitution to New York City's Education Department. I call up physical therapist Geraldine Galt of G&E Therapies. Please begin your testimony.
I was not aware of the 2014 special education fraud until I received your email. I completed an online search of this topic and found that a special education teacher was convicted of fraud in the preschool setting under the New York State Education Department. We have not been directly impacted from this conviction in our early intervention or preschool services from an occupational therapist's point of view. In general, we are finding that regulations for special education teachers are increasing in the area of licensing and oversight.
I call up Bob Trapani, occupational therapist and owner of Thrive by 5 Early Intervention. Please begin your testimony.
I am very aware of the fraud that occurred and how it affected those practicing. I own my own early intervention company and am also very involved with the New York State OT Association. So I feel I am very in the know about current legislative events. The fraud that occurred was found in preschools, yet the information found was taken by the state and generalized by early intervention. There are now trainings for medical fraud, strict billing practices, and tons of paperwork required to ensure that fraud is not taking place. The biggest part that came out of the fraud was the arm's length regulation. This states that a therapist can conduct an initial evaluation, but they cannot carry out the actual interventions for the same child. This was seen as a conflict of interest because the evaluator could potentially provide services even if deemed inappropriate in order to get monetary benefits.
I call up Claudia Stedge, Program Administrator, Family and Educational Consultants, LLC Partnership for Education. Please begin your testimony.
My agency just underwent an audit and lost $30,000 due to a previous audit that occurred during the 2013 and 2014 school year. We were initially audited to determine if there was mismanagement of federal funds and in hopes to cut down on the inappropriate use of funds. This audit accused our agency of improper documentation, inadequate intervention plans, and lack of classroom observations. Due to limited oversight and lack of direction by our board of directors, we were penalized for these actions. In general, the biggest losers in this mess are children and their families. I am still quite upset because, as providers, we are all seen as thieves in the situation.
Hey guys, here we are outside of the courtroom. I just ran into occupational therapist Hannah Fenton. Do you mind if I ask you a couple questions? Pick your brain a little bit?
Go right ahead.
Cool. So, how do you think that occupational therapy has been influenced by context, culture, and legislation?
So clearly seen in today's court case, OT has been affected by the 2014 special education fraud. So in general, there are stricter regulations, ethical considerations, and a shortage of OTs in New York State. The mismanagement of funds discovered in the audits have led to the creation of strict rules and regulations for billing, reimbursement, licensing, and general oversight. As a result of these increased regulations, there are more ethical considerations for OTs to consider. So, for example, the arm's length regulation states that an OT or agency who evaluates a child may not treat that same child. So this regulation goes against the OT treatment and evaluation process of treating the individual holistically and thoroughly. Due to these recent events, there has been a shortage of practicing OTs in the area of earlier intervention. So children are currently not receiving the proper special education services due to decreased providers, which has resulted in increased wait lists.
Hey guys, it's me. I'm back again. This time I'm with Sonia Boltansky, occupational therapy student, sat in on the case, wondering if I could pick your brain.
Yes.
So what occupational therapy or medical or societal theories do you feel have emerged or changed due to the fraud that occurred in 2014?
I love that question. Nothing has specifically emerged due to it as it's still ongoing,
Right.
but I do think there are a bunch of theories and ideas that have become more significant. From a societal perspective, individuals like ourselves trust that all healthcare providers have their patients' best interests in mind. This is supported by the first do no harm guiding principle that the patient's well-being is the primary consideration by all physicians. Although this fraud did not specifically involve primary care physicians, OTs are part of the medical system. We as society assume that all service providers want to do good and provide the best service. This relates to our legislation event because we expect that children and children with disabilities will be provided with adequate and appropriate educational opportunities and medical services. I also think that this fraud has resulted in an increase in the number of audits in the area of special education in New York State. This has led to a decrease of unethical and unlawful behavior by special education providers. This event has shown a spotlight on our ethical practices as OTs. There's been an emphasis on the core values of OT, which I'm not sure if you know them, but they're altruism, equality, freedom, justice, dignity, truth, and prudence. The special education fraud highlighted the importance of justice and veracity. From an OT point of view, justice is providing appropriate services to those in need and who qualify. Veracity is providing accurate and comprehensive information and services based on truth and honesty. These principles provide a basis for OT treatment.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Hope you guys learned something.